I need evidence, not a better version of the story.
Lena Mercer folded the rear seat of her hatchback before sunrise and pressed her blanket into the spare tire well. The foam mattress topper went beneath two empty archival boxes. Her wash bag fit behind a road atlas with a cracked plastic cover. When she lowered the cargo panel, the car looked less like a bedroom and more like something a professional woman might drive to work. She checked the balance in her banking app, $184.62. Across the municipal parking lot, the courthouse clock showed 6:40. A cold October wind pushed dry leaves against the curb, and each one made a thin scraping sound before skittering into darkness. Lena pulled on her rust-red canvas jacket. Her old museum identification card was still in its inside pocket, though the Mid-Missouri Railway Museum had closed 6 weeks earlier. She had not thrown the card away. She had also stopped wearing it where anyone could see. At 7 Municipal Clerk, Ruth Bell emerged from a side entrance carrying a steel thermos and a manila envelope. She was a square-shouldered woman with silver hair cut neatly at her jaw. Her only jewelry was a narrow watch that she consulted before speaking. "You're early. I didn't know how long the drive would take." Ruth looked once at the Missouri plates, the boxes visible through the rear glass, and then at Lena. If she understood more than Lena had said, she kept it to herself. "The depot is 3 miles east. We'll go over the contract there." The abandoned station stood beyond the last grain bins of Harrow Bend, where a county road crossed a disused spur and narrowed between sumac and waist-high grass. Its roofline appeared first long, low, and uneven against the colorless sky. Then the rest of the building emerged from the weeds. The depot was larger than the photograph Ruth had emailed. Faded cream siding peeled in curled strips from the timber frame. Several windows were boarded. Others held shards of old glass filmed with dust. Asphalt shingles had slipped from the north slope, exposing dark cedar beneath them. At the east end, the covered freight platform sagged sharply enough to make its danger visible from the road. A newer freight line ran beyond the abandoned spur. No train was in sight, but polished railheads caught the early light. Ruth unlocked the townside door and stopped Lena before she crossed the threshold. Yellow tape means no entry. That includes most of the freight room and the north platform. The engineer was very clear. Inside, the air smelled of wet timber mouse nesting and the mineral chill of a building that had gone too many winters without heat. The waiting room ceiling rose 14 feet above pine floorboards. Water had marked the pressed metal overhead in the shape of a brown island. An oak bench leaned beneath the ticket window, one arm polished by generations of hands and the other gray with rot. Ruth set the envelope on the sill. The council authorized $900. Half when you sign, half when you submit the inventory Sunday evening. Demolition begins Monday unless something changes. 7 days. That's what we can pay for. Lena, read every page. The town wanted objects photographed, numbered, and described before a salvage contractor removed anything marketable. Nothing in the agreement gave her authority to open walls, energize equipment, enter restricted zones, or decide what should be saved. What happens to the records? If there are records, identify them. Don't promise them to anybody. And if the building is more significant than the survey suggests, Ruth twisted the lid onto her thermos. Significance and a safe use are different problems. Right now, Harrow Bend can't afford either one. Lena signed. The $450 advance would cover gasoline, food, and the overdue portion of her car insurance. She folded the receipt carefully before placing it beside the dead museum card. She began with photographs. At the entrance, she took a wide frame facing east, then another facing west. She photographed the water stain, the boarded windows, the tape line, and the floor before setting down a single box. Walter Pike, her supervisor at the museum, had taught her never to trust memory inside an old building. "Document the room before the room learns your intentions," he used to say. Walter had died the previous spring, 4 months before the museum lost its lease. The thought arrived with the smell of old pine and left when Lena raised the camera again. By noon, she had assigned temporary numbers to the oak bench, a cast-iron stove collar, and a brass ticket punch fused with corrosion. She wore a white particulate mask near the pigeon debris and did not touch the flaking paint. Stable objects received nitro gloves and condition notes. Anything damp or mold-spotted stayed where it was. The central office proved more intact than the waiting room. A shallow bay projected toward the tracks, giving the former station agent a clear view in both directions. Beneath its windows stood a scarred operator's desk with empty ceramic insulators fixed along the back edge. A telegraph key remained screwed to the desktop. Beside it, beneath a square glass cover, sat a brass sounder on a dark hardwood board. 2 binding posts protruded from its base, but their wires had been cut. The ends were furred green with oxidation. Above it, an empty shelf bore the pale rectangular shadows of batteries removed decades ago. Lena photographed the terminals without lifting the cover. The instrument brought back Walter's hands, broad, freckled, steady, over a tray of rusted signal parts. He had once told a group of schoolchildren that a telegraph key was only half a conversation. A signal only mattered if someone stayed to receive it. At 4:30, Ruth returned to collect the signed hazard acknowledgement. Lena showed her the first 32 entries and the untouched operator's desk. "You work quickly," Ruth said. "I work in order. That may be more useful." She gave Lena a plastic key card bearing the courthouse seal. "Municipal washroom. East entrance. It works until 9. You don't have to. It's also where we keep the emergency first aid kit. Anyone working alone should know that." Ruth left before Lena could refuse the kindness. Darkness came early. Lena ate crackers and an apple in her car, then drove to the town park, where overnight parking was not expressly prohibited. She called her father and said the contract included lodging. The lie was small enough to cross her lips without breaking, but large enough to sit beside her afterward. She slept in her clothes beneath the hidden blanket. On Tuesday, October 20th, Lena woke at 5:40 to condensation clouding the windows. She washed at the courthouse, bought the least expensive coffee at Denise Cole's diner, and returned to the depot while the eastern sky was still a pale seam. The building seemed tighter in the cold. Boards contracted with soft ticks. Wind moved grass beneath the freight platform, but the waiting room remained still. Lena set her coffee away from the collection area and resumed photographing the operator's office. At 6:11, a freight horn sounded somewhere west of town, low, distant, and ordinary. A tremor passed through the window glass. Then, the telegraph sounder clicked. Lena froze with the camera against her cheek. The brass lever struck its stop twice, paused, and struck 3 more times. Not loudly, not cleanly, but with enough. She looked at the severed wires. She looked at the empty battery shelf. Outside, the approaching freight deepened into a rolling pressure beneath the floor. The powerless sounder tapped again. Lena set down the camera, opened the recorder on her phone, and held it beside the glass cover without touching the instrument. The lever rose and fell in the cold blue dawn. Lena slid the square glass cover straight upward and set it on a folded cotton cloth. She did not loosen the sounder's mounting screws or touch the brass lever. In the stronger morning light, the instrument looked less mysterious than neglected dust packed around the electromagnets. A cobweb stretched between the frame and its adjustable stop, and both terminal wires ended less than an inch from the binding posts. She photographed the cut ends with a ruler in the frame. Their green corrosion was undisturbed. No fresh copper showed beneath it. The empty battery shelf above the desk held no concealed modern power supply. The wires leaving the office had been clipped where they entered a porcelain tube in the wall. Lena tested nothing. She simply followed every visible connection, photographed it, and wrote what she could prove. At 6:27, she played the phone recording. 2 taps, a pause, 3 taps. Then an irregular cluster nearly buried beneath the passing train. It sounded deliberate only when she ignored the wheel noise around it. She found a Morse reference chart in her field binder and marked the intervals. The first group might have been an M if both impacts were long signals, or an I if they were short. The next might have been an S. But telegraph code depended on controlled timing, and the sounder had produced none. When she replayed it at half speed, one apparent tap separated into 2 faint mechanical bounces. It was not a message. That made the movement no less real. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Lena replaced the cover and spent the next hour testing the room without disturbing the instrument. She walked hard across the operator's office. The lever remained still. She closed the waiting room door with increasing force, stopping before the loose glass rattled. Nothing. A delivery truck crossed the road outside, shaking dust from the window sash, but the sounder did not move. At 9, wind rose from the northwest and pressed against the boarded windows. One loose strip of metal roofing scraped above the freight room. The sounder remained silent beneath its glass. Lena entered each result in her notes. A phenomenon that failed on command was still evidence if the conditions were recorded honestly. The rest of the depot waited. Behind the ticket window, she found a cast-iron dater with its handle missing. A canvas mail sack had hardened into the shape of the corner where it lay. Near the south wall, a brass ticket punch sat inside a shallow drawer, its jaws sealed by corrosion. She assigned each object a temporary number and resisted the urge to make any of them work. At the freight room threshold, yellow tape crossed the opening at chest height. Beyond it stood a platform scale, a hand truck with one wheel collapsed, and the dark outline of double cargo doors. Rainwater had lifted several floorboards along the north wall. One board bowed beneath the weight of pigeon droppings without anyone touching it. Lena photographed the room from the safe side. A drop of water landed on the tape. She looked up. Moisture had gathered along the operator bay's ceiling seam, then traveled to the freight room casing. The roof stain was larger than it had appeared the previous afternoon. She placed a clean plastic tub on unstable flooring outside the restricted zone and noted the leak rather than stepping across the tape. At noon, she drove to Cole's Diner. The dining room had 6 booths, 3 occupied by men in seed company caps. Denise Cole stood behind the counter scraping burned sugar from a coffee warmer. She was broad-faced and quick-handed with a yellow pencil fixed through the knot of her hair. "Depot woman," she said. "Inventory contractor. That sounds colder." Lena ordered coffee and dry toast. Denise placed a bowl of chicken soup beside them. "I didn't order this. Cooked too much." The soup steamed with pepper and celery. Nothing about the diner suggested food was routinely wasted. Lena reached for her wallet. Denise shook her head once. "I can throw it out, or you can save me the trouble." The kindness left Lena no graceful way to refuse it. She ate slowly, keeping her jacket zipped over the charcoal Henley she had worn the day before. When she returned to the depot, Ruth's sedan was parked beside the town entrance. Ruth stood under the failing eave, examining the plastic tub through the window. "The roof leak is spreading. I documented it. It hasn't reached the desk yet. Monday's contractor can remove the sounder before demolition. Not until we know why it moved." Ruth turned from the glass. "You said the wires were cut." "They are. There's no battery, and I can't match the tapping to valid Morse. I tried floor vibration, the doors, wind and road traffic. So far it happens only with the dawn freight. That sounds like vibration. It may be. But I don't know the path, and I'm not removing an original fixture to guess." Ruth pressed her lips together. "A mechanical curiosity won't stop demolition." "I know. A good story won't either." "I know that too." Lena gave her the condition sheet for the operator's bay. The photographs showed the cut terminal's empty shelf sealing moisture and untouched mounting hardware. Ruth read the page twice. What would count as evidence? A repeatable cause. Something physically tied to the building, and an inspection by somebody qualified to recognize railway signal equipment. Ruth handed the sheet back. "Then find that person before your 7 days are gone." At 5, Lena carried her tripod into the waiting room and found the clamp cracked where the head met the center post. She wrapped it with archival linen tape, though she knew it would not hold the camera level for long. She called 3 numbers. The first belonged to a regional railroad museum that opened only Thursday through Saturday. The second reached a disconnected line. The third was answered after 7 rings. "Reed. Mr. Amos Reed. Depends who's asking." Lena introduced herself and described the depot, the disconnected sounder, and the morning freight. She expected him to interrupt when she mentioned tapping. He did not. "What kind of sounder?" "Open frame brass lever on a hardwood resonator board. 2 electromagnets. Adjustable upper and lower stops. The return spring looks intact, but I haven't tested its tension. Battery shelf. Empty. Both terminal wires have old corrosion across the cuts. No visible modern wiring." "Did you put a meter on it?" "No. I'm inventorying, not repairing." A pause followed. She heard a clock somewhere near his telephone. Did you lift the board? No. Turn any screws? No. Oil it? No. The clock ticked again. Good, he said. Most people start by destroying the question. Lena looked through the ticket window at the sounder under its glass. Can you inspect it? Tomorrow afternoon. The freight passes at dawn. Then you'll record it again before I get there. Same camera position. Mark the lever's resting place without touching the mechanism. How? Put a card behind it. Pencil line through the glass. Your photograph should show whether it settles in the same place afterward. He gave her an address outside town and told her he had retired from signal maintenance 11 years earlier. He made no claim that he could save the depot. I need evidence, Lena said, not a better version of the story. For the first time, his voice softened. Then we may get along. That evening, Denise packed 2 biscuits in brown paper and placed them beside Lena's coffee before she could order. Lena spent $4.12 washed at the courthouse and parked beneath a cottonwood at the edge of the town park. Rain began after midnight. By 5:30 Wednesday morning, the storm had passed east, leaving the depot roof black with water. Lena positioned her phone on the desk and braced the damaged tripod with a stack of empty archival boxes. She slipped a white index card behind the glass cover and drew a fine pencil line level with the sounder lever's resting edge. At 6:11, the rails beyond the weeds began to hum. The first ripple appeared in the cold coffee she had set on the operator's desk. A second cup on the floor remained smooth. The freight horn carried across the fields. Window glass trembled in its frame. Beneath the cover, the brass lever lifted from the pencil line and struck its stop. Once, twice. Then, 4 quick impacts followed as the locomotive crossed the distant junction. When the last car passed, the lever settled slightly below its original mark. Lena kept both cameras running until every surface was still. At 1:40 that afternoon, a faded green pickup stopped beside the depot. Amos Reed climbed out carrying a canvas tool bag. He was thin, slightly stooped, and wore a magnifying visor pushed above the brim of his cap. Before greeting Lena, he studied the disused spur, the active line beyond it, and the sagging platform between them. Amos listened without offering an explanation. Then he removed a small machine screw from a compartment in his tool bag, fitted it through Lena's broken tripod clamp, and tightened it with a stubby screwdriver. You'll need the camera steady tomorrow, he said. You think it will happen again? I think a train will pass again. We'll let the building answer the rest. He lowered the magnifying visor and bent toward the glass-covered sounder without touching it. Amos placed an inspection mirror beneath the operator's shelf and angled it until the flashlight beam caught a line of rusted steel behind the desk. Don't move anything yet, he said. Lena raised her camera. The steel belonged to an old electrical conduit descending from the porcelain wall tube. Instead of ending freely beneath the floor, it had been fastened to the back of the operator's desk with a heavy 2-hole bracket. One screw remained tight. The other had backed out far enough to show 3 clean threads beneath a collar of rust. Amos traced the conduit downward with the mirror. That desk isn't just sitting against the wall. Somebody coupled it to the building. Would that carry enough vibration? Depends where the other end goes. They could not follow it beneath the office without lifting floorboards, and the contract forbade that. Amos did not propose an exception. He walked outside, staying well inside the town's boundary fence, and examined the platform from stable ground. The old spur passed within 35 feet of the operator's bay. Weeds covered much of it, but the rails still ran west toward a locked turnout beside the active line. The switch points had been secured out of service. Nothing could enter the spur, yet the steel remained physically joined at the frog enclosure rails. When a train crosses that turnout, Amos said the rail carries the impact. The platform framing receives some through the ground and old fasteners. That conduit gives it a cleaner path into the desk, like a tuning fork touching a table. Cruder, but yes. The explanation accounted for the cold coffee rippling before the cup on the floor. It did not yet prove that the sounder itself could move without current. Amos removed nothing. With Lena filming, he examined the lever through the open glass cover and pointed to the narrow return spring at the side of the armature. See the last turn. The spring appeared whole until Lena used the macro lens. Its anchor loop had stretched into an oval, leaving the lever with less tension than its adjustment scale indicated. Fine rust marked the lower stop where the armature had struck repeatedly. If the board moves sharply enough, Amos said that weak spring won't hold the armature steady. It rebounds between the stops. Why does it sound like groups? Locomotive axles, wheel sets, rail joints. Whatever passes across the turnout doesn't strike one smooth note. So no one is sending anything. No one alive or dead. Lena lowered the camera, grateful for his plainness. They prepared for Thursday's freight without altering the instrument. Amos brought 3 identical enamel cups from his truck. Lena filled each to the same pencil mark. 1 went on the operator's desk, 1 on the wall ledge, and 1 on the floor. She fixed strips of removable paper tape beside the sounder's board, the conduit bracket, and the desk leg so their motion could be compared on video. At 6:09 Thursday morning, the depot held its breath around them. The sky beyond the bay windows was pale lavender. Amos stood behind the camera with his hands in his coat pockets. Lena watched the cups. The horn sounded first. Water trembled in the desk cup. The wall cup followed with smaller rings. The floor cup remained nearly smooth. A low metallic singing traveled along the abandoned spur. As the locomotive reached the turnout, the loose conduit bracket shivered. The movement entered the hardwood board. Beneath the glassless square of dust, the sounder's armature bounced against its stop. 2 impacts, a gap, 3 more. Then the faster rattle of wheel sets passing in succession. Amos did not touch the mechanism until the last car had gone and all 3 water surfaces were still. He used a wooden probe to apply light pressure to the conduit bracket while Lena recorded the resting sounder. Nothing moved. When he released it, the bracket settled against the desk frame with a small click. "There's your path," he said. "Rail to platform and framing. Framing to the old conduit. Conduit to desk. Desk to resonator. And the weak spring lets the lever answer. It lets the lever rattle. Answering is what people do afterward." Lena entered the result in her condition report with no reference to ghosts, codes, or messages. She attached photographs of the turnout taken from public property, the bracket, the stretched spring loop, and the 3 cups. The anomaly had become a maintenance problem. Yet the board still bothered her. The sounder's hardwood resonator was 27 inches wide, darker than the desk, and mounted beneath the battery shelf. Its job had been to make each electrical click easier for an operator to hear. The conduit bracket explained why the entire assembly vibrated, but not why the right side sat 1/8 of an inch farther from the wall than the left. Lena laid a straightedge across it. Amos followed her gaze. Warped. "Maybe, but the board is flat." He shone his flashlight along the lower edge. The visible mounting screws were round-headed brass, evenly spaced and blackened with age. 2 pointed ends protruded downward through the battery shelf above, directly over the resonator. Their square shafts did not match any of the visible hardware. "They were driven from underneath," Lena said, "and hidden by the shelf lip." She photographed both before reaching for a screwdriver. The first square head screw resisted. Amos steadied the shelf without taking the tool from her. A dry flake of paint fell onto the desk as the threads began to turn. The second screw released more easily. Nothing opened. Lena inspected the side clearance and found a thin recessed catch where the resonator board met the wall trim. It was not a secret switch, only a cabinet maker's turn button, painted the same brown as the beadboard. She rotated it 90 degrees. The right edge of the resonator moved toward her. Amos caught the weight before it strained the telegraph wires. Together, they lowered the board onto padded blocks without removing the sounder from it. Behind the assembly was a rectangular black opening. Cold air escaped from the wall cavity, carrying the odor of paper-dry wood and something faintly sour. Lena measured before looking inside. 9 inches high, 31 wide, approximately 6 deep. Narrow enough to fit between the wall framing and the operator bay's interior finish. Long enough to have been intentional. Her flashlight found a parcel wrapped in gray cloth. Beside it stood 2 narrow volumes with dark bindings, several bundles of cards, and the pale edges of envelopes laid flat against the back. She did not reach in. The sour odor concerned her. A patch of white bloom marked one cloth corner, and the lowest paper edges had tide lines from old dampness. Mold, Amos asked. Possibly dormant, possibly not. He stepped back at once. Lena closed the office door to prevent a draft from carrying loose material into the waiting room. She put on her particulate mask and fresh nitrile gloves, then established a clean staging surface using polyethylene sheeting over a stable table. Beneath a sheet of unprinted archival paper, she placed a rigid support board. Only after photographing the cavity did she lift the cloth parcel. It was lighter than expected and small enough to rest in both palms. She slid it directly onto the support without unfolding the fabric. A brass disc had worked partly through a worn seam. Its face bore the letters HB above the number 17. A baggage check, Amos said from the doorway. Or a claim tag. Same family of object. A water-stained card corner clung to the parcel. 3 surnames were visible in faded pencil: Hale, Reed, and Varden, followed by marks that might have been dates or quantities. Amos leaned closer when he saw his own name, then deliberately moved back. Common enough around here, he said. Lena did not ask whether he believed that. She used a narrow spatula to separate the loose card from the cloth, but stopped when the damp fibers resisted. Forcing it would transfer ink or tear the paper. She photographed it in place. Behind the parcel, one folded sheet had slipped from between the ledgers. Its outer face showed a simple line drawing of the freight room. Along the north wall was a row of rectangles numbered 12 through 19. Number 17 had been circled twice. Lena looked toward the yellow tape across the freight room doorway. "We're not going in there," Amos said. "No." The number offered direction, not permission. They had just transferred the parcel and drawing to clean supports when Ruth arrived. Her shoes clicked through the waiting room and stopped at the closed office door. Lena met her there before allowing her inside. "We identified the cause of the tapping," she said. "Passing trains transfer vibration from the locked spur through the building and an old steel conduit. The sounder has a weakened return spring." Ruth's expression settled somewhere between relief and disappointment. "So, it's broken. It's behaving mechanically. That's different. And the wall." Lena showed her the photographs before opening the door. Ruth put on the spare mask Lena offered, then stood outside the clean work boundary. The loosened resonator board exposed the shallow cavity. The cloth parcel baggage check card corner and folded freight room drawing rested under a clear protective cover. Nothing about them looked valuable in the way auction catalogs used the word. Ruth studied the diagram. There used to be storage benches in there. Do you know what they held? Express parcels, coal buckets, whatever a station needed. Number 17 may still exist, but the floor is unsafe. We won't cross the tape. Ruth looked toward the freight room, then at the documents still inside the wall. "Can you tell what the books are?" "Not without removing them. The lower edges may have mold. I need clean trays, better masks, and advice from a paper conservator. If we empty the cavity carelessly, we could destroy the order in which everything was stored. The demolition contractor comes Monday. Then I need 48 hours. For what? To stabilize what I can, document the arrangement, and determine whether these records have local significance. Not to make a claim before the evidence does." Ruth removed her glasses and cleaned a spot of dust from one lens. The gesture took long enough for the depot to become quiet around them. "I can authorize 48 hours for assessment," she said. "That is not a cancellation." "I understand. And nobody enters that freight room until the engineer clears a route. I'll write it into the work log." Ruth looked once more at the 3 surnames on the card. She gave no sign of recognizing them. After she left, Amos opened his tool bag and took out a shallow compartmented tin. From it, he selected a machine screw no longer than Lena's thumbnail. "Your tripod," he said. "The tape is holding. The tape is pretending." He removed the temporary wrap, aligned the cracked clamp, and fitted the screw with a washer so small Lena almost lost sight of it between his fingers. When he tightened it, the tripod head held level. "What do I owe you?" "Make the next photograph square." By late afternoon, Ruth had delivered 2 clean plastic document trays from the county records room. Lena lined the first with acid-free tissue. She changed gloves, positioned the camera directly above the cavity, and made one final image of the untouched contents. Its cloth binding was brown, its spine narrow enough to circle with 2 fingers. No title appeared on the cover. Fine grit fell onto the tissue as Lena lowered it closed and level into the tray. She did not open it. The remaining cards and letters stayed inside the dark cavity behind the operator's desk. The baggage check waited beneath its protective cover. Across the building, yellow tape guarded the route toward whatever had once been marked 17. Between them, the single, narrow ledger rested in its clean white tray. Lena rolled 2 clean towels into firm cylinders and covered them with acid-free board. Between them, the narrow ledger could rest open without forcing its spine flat. Friday morning light reached only halfway across the waiting room. She moved the work table away from the windows, checked that the roof leak had not advanced, and placed a sheet of clean blotting paper beneath the tray. Her phone stood on the repaired tripod directly above it. Amos waited on the other side of the table. Ruth had brought a county records clerk's magnifier, 3 pencils, and a box of unprinted paper flags. Nobody brought coffee near the documents. Lena opened the front cover by less than 45 degrees. The first page released a smell of dust and cold ashes. Its paper had yellowed evenly, except for a dark tide line along the bottom quarter-inch. The writing was graphite soft at the edges but legible. January 13, 1930 Sook. Below the date, someone had ruled 4 columns by hand, household need received, offered, in return completed. The first entry named the Hale family. 2 sacks of coal had been received from a rail yard crew. In return, Thomas Hale had repaired 3 stove doors after his injured hand healed. The next household received 6 hot suppers during a week of illness. Its return entry, written later in darker pencil, recorded 20 jars sealed for winter use by another family. No dollar amounts appeared. Page after page held coal meals, rides to the county doctor, split firewood, mended coats, and nights in spare rooms. Some offers were fulfilled within days. Others waited months. Beside several the station agent had written carried forward without penalty. "This isn't freight," Ruth said. No, Lena replied. But it was managed like freight. The careful columns transformed kindness into something trackable without pricing it. The station had been the exchange point because people already came there for mail shipments, news, and trains. A sack could be left without a public visit to a struggling household. A promise could be recorded without announcing who had needed it. The name Elias Bell appeared at the foot of the earliest pages. His compact signature followed each weekly total. Ruth leaned closer but did not touch the paper. "My husband's family has Bells. I don't know if they're connected. We won't assume they are." Near the center of the ledger, the handwriting changed. The newer hand slanted forward, its capital letters narrow and certain. At the top of one page it had written, "Bonlist M. Varden Operator." Beneath it, May Varden recorded 18 households affected by winter layoffs. She separated nothing into giver and recipient. A man who received coal in February delivered medicine in March. A woman given rail fare to reach her sick sister provided 6 nights of lodging that summer. One family appeared in all 4 columns over 11 years. Lena's finger stopped above a margin note. The graphite there had faded more than the entries. She adjusted the sidelight until the words rose from the paper. A signal only matters if someone stays to receive it. For several seconds, all Lena heard was the building settling around them. Walter had used almost the same sentence in the museum workshop. He could not have known this ledger. He had grown up in Ohio, and nothing in his papers connected him to Harrow Bend. The phrase had not traveled through blood or secret correspondence. It had survived because people who worked around signals understood that sending was only half an act. Lena placed a clean paper flag beside the line without adhering it to the page. Amos cleared his throat. "Go back 1 sheet." She did. Halfway down the left column was the name Reed, Anna, and Joseph. The entry, dated February 7, 1947, recorded heating coal and transport to a clinic in Brookfield. In the return column, someone had later written, "Anna Reed hems and repairs 46 garments." Amos sat down. "My mother was Anna Reed before she married," he said. She could sew anything except a straight curtain. Ruth pulled out the chair beside him but did not speak. "She told us the winter my grandfather got sick, the railroad men kept the stove going." Amos studied the entry without leaning closer. She said they were paying him back for years of work. The completed column showed that Anna's 46 repaired garments had been distributed among 7 households. No balance remained beside her family's name. "She paid it forward," Ruth said. Amos shook his head gently. Looks like they all did. He asked Lena to finish photographing the page before making a copy for him. The request mattered. Even with his mother's name before him, he would not make the record his private possession. They worked through noon. The second ledger began in 1949 and continued through 1958. It used the same 4 columns, though diesel fuel school rides and electrical repairs gradually replaced coal deliveries and harness mending. May's handwriting appeared less often. Later entries were signed by 2 station agents and a freight clerk. Inside the wall cavity, Lena counted 37 pledge cards in their original bundles. Some were stable. Others showed white surface bloom and remained isolated. She lifted 9 envelopes together on a rigid support. Each was sealed and addressed to a Harrow Bend family. "We don't open these," she said. Ruth nodded. "Even if the names are familiar. Especially then. We document them, consult a conservator, and determine who has authority. Curiosity isn't consent." The small iron key lay beneath the envelopes. Its bow was worn smooth, and a paper label tied to it read, "Bench 17." Behind it, Lena found an unsealed folded note rather than another letter. The outer line read, "For the next keeper of the room." She documented its position before opening it. The note was signed by May Varden and dated November 2, 1958. Its ink had browned, but the short text remained clear. Number 17, she explained, was one of 8 compartments beneath the freight room bench. It held rotating supplies, blankets, sealed food, stove parts, lamp oil, vouchers, and whatever else could wait unseen until a household needed it. Nothing belonged permanently to the locker. Its purpose was to be emptied and filled again. The final line instructed the keeper to destroy names when privacy required it, but never destroy the obligation to notice. Lena read that line twice and returned the note to its support. There was no treasure behind the yellow tape. There might not be anything left in compartment 17 after 60. 8 years. The important evidence was that the depot's original function, receiving, recording, holding, and forwarding, had once been extended to human need. Ruth looked around the waiting room as though measuring it for something other than demolition. "We still need a reason for the building," she said. "Documents can be moved. But separating them from the operator's bay removes part of the evidence," Lena said. "The telegraph desk, freight diagram, and lockers explain how the system worked. Write that plainly. No speeches." "I will." By mid-afternoon, Lena had drafted a 6-page preliminary significance report. She described the anomaly's mechanical cause first, then the service cavity, the ledgers, the card bundles, the sealed letters, and the relationship between the Dawn list and the depot's public function. Every claim carried an object number or photograph reference. She did not write that the building had saved Harrow Bend. She wrote that the available records documented a reciprocal aid system operating from 1936 through 1958. At 4, Ruth returned with Councilman Paul Dwyer, who owned the hardware store and chaired the town's property committee. His wet boots left 2 dark prints inside the door before he noticed and wiped them on the mat. He read the executive summary standing at the ticket window. "A collector might pay for the telegraph outfit," he said. "Maybe the ledgers, too, if railroad names are in them." "The records shouldn't be divided before appraisal and ownership review," Lena said. "I'm not ordering it. I'm saying the town has a demolition bill." Ruth folded her arms. "And 48 hours left before the contractor mobilizes." Dwyer looked toward the operator's bay. "Give us a plan that costs less than keeping an empty wreck." He left the report on the sill and departed without pretending the decision was simple. As evening came, Amos carried the sealed letters to the locked municipal records cabinet in their rigid tray. Ruth took custody of the key. The mold suspect cards remained isolated in labeled containers. Lena closed both ledgers and returned their supports to the work table. Before covering the first one, she looked again at May Varden's sentence. The paper held no revelation about Lena's family and offered no inheritance. It did something less dramatic and more. At the town park the previous night, Lena had hidden her blanket before daylight. That morning, she had accepted Denise's biscuits only because they were described as leftovers. She understood the pattern now, though understanding did not yet make confession easy. She set a final reversible paper flag beside May's faded words. Beyond, the operator's window dawn had long since given way to a gray Missouri evening. The telegraph sounder stood silent under its glass while the marked sentence waited in the last clean band of light. Priya Shah began by driving a sharp awl into the east freight room sill. The tool entered nearly to its handle. "Paint is carrying the shape," she said. "The wood beneath it isn't carrying much else." Saturday morning had brought clear weather and a hard north wind. Priya wore a white hard hat, had over a wool cap, and moved through the depot with a folding ruler moisture meter and roll of orange flagging. She was the structural engineer retained by the town's insurer, not an advocate Lena had chosen. That made her findings useful. The waiting room and operator's office could remain occupied under controlled conditions. The freight room sill had lost much of its bearing at the northeast corner. 3 platform joists were split or decayed, and one section of tongue-and-groove flooring near the cargo doors could not support a person. The roof framing remained mostly straight, but failed flashing around the old stovepipe, and missing shingles had admitted water. Priya added a second barrier 6 feet inside the freight room doorway. No one crosses this line until there's shoring and a temporary walkway. "Bench 17 is against the north wall," Lena said. "Then bench 17 waits." Lena wrote the restriction into the work log. Ruth arrived with Councilman Dwyer and the demolition contractor at 11. They stood in the waiting room while Priya gave them the shortest honest version. The building was not on the verge of total collapse, but demolition work at the east end could disturb salvageable portions. Immediate stabilization was possible. Permanent rehabilitation would require more study and money. "How much time does stabilization buy?" Dwyer asked. "Time to make a responsible decision," Priya said, "not permission to open the building." The town authorized a 30-day demolition pause. It was less than preservation and more than Lena had possessed that morning. By afternoon, temporary fencing enclosed the dangerous platform edge. A contractor installed adjustable steel shores beneath the freight room beam from stable ground. The roof received a reinforced membrane over the leaking stovepipe area, weighted and fastened without concealing the damaged materials that still needed assessment. Lena submitted her inventory before Sunday's deadline. Ruth handed her the second $450 check in the courthouse hallway. "You finished the contract," Ruth said. "The documents aren't finished." "No, but the town can't ask you to keep working for free." She placed a 1-page extension on the counter, 40 paid hours to coordinate stabilization records and prepare a reuse proposal. The hourly rate was modest. Lena signed before fear could turn dignity into refusal. On Monday, Calvin Price arrived with 4 high school shop students and enough battery work lights to brighten the waiting room without energizing the depot's ruined wiring. Calvin had a gray mustache stained darker on one side by coffee. He listened to Priya's hazard briefing, repeated it to the students, and made each of them point out the exclusion lines before unloading a tool. Their first task was not restoration, it was protection. Using measurements, Lena had recorded they built removable plywood covers for the broken townside windows. Each panel stood off the historic sash on padded blocks and fastened into modern framing holes where possible. Nothing was screwed through surviving decorative trim. 2 students cut rigid supports for document trays, while the others labeled every panel by window location. Lena caught herself reaching for a drill when one student struggled with a warped cleat. Calvin put his hand over the tool case. "Your job is to tell him what the building needs. I can fix it faster." "Probably. Then he learns nothing, and you become the only person who can leave the room." Lena stepped back. The student recut the cleat, checked it against the jamb, and fitted it on his second attempt. By the end of the day, 3 windows were protected, the work log held 5 signatures, and Lena's hands were less tired than her habit expected. Every morning thereafter began with the same short briefing: stable zones, prohibited areas, mask requirements, emergency exit, and the rule that no paper left its tray without Lena's approval. Volunteers swept only surfaces Priya and the environmental assessor had cleared. Pigeon debris was handled by a trained cleanup crew, not students. Mold, suspect documents remained sealed apart from the stable collection. Denise delivered soup in a lidded steel pot and announced that the diner needed the container returned. Nobody called the meal a donation. Amos worked at the operator's desk. He removed surface dust from the sounder with a soft brush, but made no polished brass shine where age belonged. The loose conduit bracket and stretch spring stayed exactly as found until Lena completed the final anomaly record. If we fix the rattle, she asked, do we lose the thing people will remember? We keep the recording, he said. We keep the worn parts. We don't keep damage working just because it tells a good story. Rain returned Wednesday night. This time, Lena met it inside the depot with permission work lights and 6 empty collection tubs placed beneath known leaks. She watched water darken the shingles but not cross the repaired stovepipe flashing. The operator's desk remained dry. A new drip appeared above the freight room doorway. The roofer found a split where the later asphalt roof met an older cedar course. He installed temporary flashing replaced, only the failed shingles necessary to stop entry, and photographed each layer before covering it. At the south wall, volunteers cleared leaves from the shallow drainage swale. Downspout extensions carried runoff beyond the limestone piers instead of pouring it beneath the sill. The next rain struck harder. Water moved through the gutters in an unbroken sheet and discharged into the grass. Lena stood beneath the eave and watched for splashback. None reached the siding. Inside, the damp smell began to weaken. Priya would not approve access to the freight room bench until the replacement sill section and temporary walkway were installed. A carpenter scarfed sound-treated timber into the stable portion of the east sill, using steel plates where the joint would remain reversible and visible for later study. He replaced no more historic material than necessary. The platform's 3 failed joists received sister members, but the outer edge remained closed to everyone. The temporary walkway required 2 days. Its plywood surface rested on independent supports rather than the decayed floorboards and ran directly from the doorway to the north wall bench. Handrails marked both sides. Priya inspected every connection before stepping onto it herself. 2 people maximum, she said. No crowding around the bench, no lifting until we know what's attached. Lena entered the rule in the log. Bench 17 had waited nearly 7 decades. It could wait 1 more night. The next morning, Amos crossed the temporary walkway first while Lena filmed from behind him. The freight room smelled of wet iron and old grain sacks. Light entered through gaps in the boarded cargo doors, laying narrow white bars across the hand truck and platform scale. Against the north wall stood a built-in bench 12 feet long, its seat divided by seams almost hidden beneath peeling brown paint. Numbers had once been stenciled along its apron. Most had disappeared, but raking light revealed fragments, 1416 and the faint upper curve of 17. Amos did not use the key immediately. He checked the hinges with an inspection mirror and ran a magnet along the apron to locate concealed fasteners. Lena compared the spacing with May Varden's diagram. The brass baggage check marked HB17 aligned with the 4th compartment. The small iron key entered its lock but stopped halfway. Rust behind the ward, Amos said. He applied no oil that could stain the wood or anything inside. Instead, he used a hand blower to remove loose grit, then worked the key through movements no wider than a breath. On the 6th attempt, it seated fully. Lena held a rigid tray beneath the opening. The lock turned. The bench front released by less than an inch, restrained by a leather strap inside. Amos supported it while Lena photographed the first view. There was no chest, no parcel of money, no object waiting to transform the depot by its price. A flattened tin of powdered milk lay on its side. 2 empty food cans bore paper labels reduced to pale ghosts. Behind them rested a rusted stove door hinge, 3 lamp oil vouchers, a packet of inventory tags, and a folded wool blanket fragment protected within a cotton sack. Every object was ordinary enough to have once mattered completely. At the back stood a second register. Its cover read Locker Rotation 936 and negotiate. Lena transferred it onto the tray without opening it. Amos lifted the loose objects one at a time only after she assigned them numbers. The final item was a small wooden sign, its lettering faded but readable. Liquids needed. Return what can wait. The register later confirmed that the lockers were emptied and refilled dozens of times. Blankets left in winter returned as canned fruit in summer. Stove parts gave way to school shoes. Nothing remained long enough to become treasure because usefulness, not accumulation, had been the point. The outer platform closed. By dusk, rain moved over Harrow Bend again. Lena stood on the townside path and looked at the depot. Warm, battery work lights shone through the waiting room windows, illuminating people at separate tables rather than hiding the building's scars. Above them, water struck the patched roof, entered the cleared gutters, and ran cleanly away from the old limestone piers. For the first time since she arrived, none of it ran down the walls. On the second Saturday of November, the depot opened for identification appointments. Only the stabilized waiting room and operator's bay were accessible. Folding tables stood beneath battery lights, each holding digital copies rather than original documents. Lena had placed the Dawn List pages in order, removed private medical details from the public reference set, and printed a simple form for corrections that required evidence instead of family certainty. People arrived carrying photographs in envelopes and tins. Mrs. Hale brought a picture of her grandfather repairing a cast-iron stove door. A retired teacher identified May Varden in a station picnic photograph by the watch chain crossing her vest. Amos contributed a copy of Anna Reed's suing ledger where 46 garment repairs matched the number in the Dawn List. No single object proved the whole history. Together they made its ordinary scale visible. A woman named Carol Varden stopped beside May's margin sentence. She did not claim May as an ancestor merely because they shared a surname. She wrote down her parents' names and offered to check a family Bible. "That's exactly what we need," Lena told her. "A path we can verify." Denise served coffee outside the collection boundary. Ruth recorded oral histories in the ticket office, beginning each one with the same question. What do you know firsthand? By closing time, 23 visitors had added names, dates, or photographs. 2 had corrected assumptions Lena would otherwise have carried into the catalog. The Dawn List had begun to belong to the town again without becoming anybody's private legend. The regional paper conservator arrived Monday with a microscope, a humidity meter, and no interest in dramatic discoveries. She examined the white bloom on the lower card bundles, isolated affected material, and arranged cold storage through a partner institution to halt further mold activity. Stable pages were cleaned with soft brushes and vulcanized rubber sponges where testing showed it safe. Iron gall ink entries received separate supports because moisture could accelerate their damage. The 9 sealed letters remained sealed. Digitization proceeded 1 page at a time. Each file name matched an object number. Every movement appeared in the location log. The original order of cards remained intact even when that order seemed untidy. "This will take months," the conservator said. Lena looked at the trays filling the temporary records room. "I know." It was the first time she had answered those words without hearing failure inside them. The sounder received the same restraint. Amos documented the stretched spring and loose bracket before fitting conservation-grade supports that prevented further chatter. He did not polish the brass. The dark fingerprints of operators remained in its surface, and the recording preserved the tapping that had led Lena to the wall. The council met on November 24 beneath fluorescent lights in the courthouse basement. 3 plans occupied the agenda. The first resumed demolition after portable objects were removed. The second sold the sounder and selected railroad material to private collectors. The third stabilized the depot under a long-term lease while opening only the waiting room and operator's bay. Lena presented the third plan without promising a fully restored museum. The freight room would remain a controlled work zone. The safe rooms could host oral history appointments, transit information, charging outlets, a small emergency pantry, and temporary seating during storms or road closures. Grants would fund conservation and accessibility work in stages. Volunteers could help only where qualified supervisors approved. Councilman Dwyer tapped the cost estimate with one finger. "It doesn't save the whole building," Nolina said. "It saves what can be used responsibly now. The rest stays protected until the town can afford the next decision. What happens if donations stop? The lease includes review points. The town keeps ownership. The Preservation Trust carries insurance and maintenance obligations." Dwyer looked toward Ruth and the collector's offer. Lena placed it beside the archive policy. Selling the sounder would separate the anomaly from the place that caused it. Selling the ledgers would separate the record from the depot system that made it possible. The amount covers demolition, not a future. The council voted 4-1 for the limited-use lease. No one applauded. Ruth simply exhaled and wrote the result into the minutes. The Harrow Bend Preservation Trust signed the lease 6 days later. Its first budget was assembled from small grants, local donations, volunteer labor, and the town's redirected demolition allocation. There was enough for stabilization insurance document conservation and a modest one-year coordinator's salary. Ruth handed Lena the employment agreement in the restored corner of the waiting room. "You should read every page." "I will." "And there's a room above Denise's cousin's pharmacy. Month to month, nothing grand." Lena kept her eyes on the contract. "Why are you telling me?" "Because your car windows frost from the inside." The silence between them held no accusation. Lena touched the old museum card inside her jacket. "I've been sleeping there since the museum closed." "I know. I told my father the contract included lodging." Ruth waited. "I didn't want help to become the first thing people knew about me." "It isn't." That was all Ruth said. Lena signed the coordinator's agreement, then accepted the pharmacy number. She paid her own deposit from the contract money and moved into the room with one mattress, 2 archival boxes, and the blanket she no longer had to hide before dawn. At the depot, the first permanent work light illuminated the operator's desk. Outside, late November rain ran from the repaired gutters into the grass. Inside, Lena wrote the trust's ownership policy. "The collection will remain intact, locally held, and available under documented conditions." She declined the collector's offer that afternoon. 8 months later, Calvin Price fitted the final oak slat into a waiting room bench. The wood was new, harvested from a storm-fallen tree, and milled locally. His students had copied the surviving bench's mortise and tenon construction, but a small brass plate beneath the seat identified their work as a 2027 reproduction. Nothing new was being passed off as old. June sunlight entered through repaired sash windows and crossed the pine floor in long rectangles. The walls still carried small scars where fixtures had been removed decades earlier. Lena had chosen not to fill every hole. A restored room did not need to pretend it had never been hurt. The safe portion of the depot opened 2 mornings each week. The waiting room held 4 charging outlets, transit schedules, shelves of oral history recordings, and a pantry cabinet stocked with soup hygiene supplies, socks, and bus vouchers. No eligibility form hung on its door. Visitors wrote down only what needed replenishing. Behind a glazed partition, the freight room remained a work zone. Bench 17 stood open beneath controlled lighting, displaying the empty milk tin stove hinge, lamp oil vouchers, and wool fragment. The locker rotation register rested nearby in a sealed support open to a page where blankets given in January returned as canned peaches in July. The operator's bay retained its telegraph key sounder, battery shelf, and exposed section of steel conduit. A diagram explained how vibration from the passing freight had reached the weakened lever. At 6:12 each morning, visitors sometimes waited for the old tapping. It never came. Amos had stabilized the spring and bracket without erasing their wear. The sounder's silence was not a loss of mystery. It was evidence that the mystery had been treated with care. The 9 letters had taken longer. 7 families granted permission for conservation and study. One requested that its letter remain sealed for another generation. The 9th had no confirmed descendant and remained closed under the trust's privacy policy. May Varden's letter was among those approved. Lena opened it in the records room with the conservator present. The paper contained no final instructions, land deed, or hidden account. May had written to Elias Bell after an illness kept her from the depot for 11 weeks in 1941. Neighbors had left soup on her steps. Anna Reed had repaired her coat. A farm family supplied coal without signing its name. May's letter confessed that she had considered ending the Dawn list because she could no longer bear to be recorded among those receiving help. Elias had refused. His reply, preserved with hers, contained one sentence underlined twice. "If the keeper may never need keeping, then the list is only pride arranged in columns." May returned to the operator's desk that spring. Her own name appeared thereafter as recipient, recorder, and provider at different times. The discovery resolved what the ledgers had implied. The Dawn list had never divided Harrow Bend into generous people and needy ones. It recorded the movement between those positions. Lena authorized a digital excerpt with the family's consent. The original letter returned to dark storage. On reopening morning, 32 chairs faced the ticket window. There was no stage. Ruth spoke for 3 minutes about the lease. Priya explained why half the freight room remained closed. Calvin's students demonstrated the reproduction bench and pointed proudly to the plate identifying their work. Councilman Dwyer carried in a cardboard box of extension cords and placed it beside the charging station. Hardware store had extras, he said. Lena checked the unopened packaging. I'll add them to the donation log. I assumed you would. Denise filled the pantry cabinet with soup vouchers and claimed the diner had printed too many. Amos stood beside the Dawn List display. His mother's sewing ledger appeared there only as a digital copy. When visitors asked what Anna Reed had received, he told them. When they asked what she had returned, he told them that too. Near the entrance stood a narrow new ledger bound in blue cloth. Its columns were simpler than May's need noticed, help offered, help completed. No values were assigned. No totals ranked one service above another. The first page contained 4 entries: a ride to a medical appointment, a porch rail repair, 2 grocery deliveries, and an hour of company for a man whose wife had died. The trust called it the New Dawn List. Shortly before 6, Lena entered the operator's bay alone. Her rust-red jacket hung from the old ticket hook. She wore the same brown work boots resoled now, and her hair remained in a low braid. The museum card was no longer in her pocket. It rested inside her desk drawer beside the first $450 payment receipt. Not as proof that she had once belonged somewhere, but as evidence of the distance between one job and the next. Outside the rails began to hum. A freight horn sounded west of town. Visitors turned toward the telegraph instrument as the locomotive crossed the turnout. The window glass trembled. A faint vibration traveled through the floor and touched the desk. The sounder remained still. Lena watched the lever hold its resting position. She remembered the first morning, the severed wires, and her phone shaking slightly in her hand. She remembered hiding her blanket beneath archival boxes. Most of all, she remembered believing that accepting anything would place her name forever on one side of an invisible ledger. The freight passed east, each car carrying its weight beyond Harrow Bend. Ruth appeared at the operator's doorway. "They're ready." Lena entered the waiting room. There was no ribbon to cut. Instead, the town had agreed that the first act of reopening would be practical. Denise placed a packet of pantry vouchers inside the new cabinet. Calvin's youngest student entered the porch repair on the blue ledger. Amos set down a small sewing kit bearing his mother's name. Lena stood beside May Varden's margin sentence, now reproduced beneath protective glass. This depot was built to receive things, she said. Messages, freight travelers, weather reports. The people who kept it learned that receiving was not the lesser half of the work. She looked toward the blue ledger. A signal only mattered if someone stayed to receive it. No one applauded immediately. Mrs. Hale rose and wrote her name beside the grocery deliveries. Councilman Dwyer offered use of the hardware store truck. A young mother took 1 bus voucher from the cabinet, folded it into her pocket, and added Saturday childcare to the list of help she could offer later. The room began operating before the speech had fully ended. During the following weeks, Lena learned the limits of the work. Some appointments were missed. 2 volunteers argued over catalog language. A gutter joint failed during a storm and had to be repaired again. The trust postponed freight. Room plaster work when a grant application was declined. None of those things threatened the depot's meaning. Restoration was not a single decision made correctly. It was a sequence of ordinary obligations kept after the hopeful moment had passed. Lena visited her father in July and told him the truth about the weeks in her car. He listened without interrupting. She did not turn the confession into an apology for surviving, and he did not turn it into a debt she owed him. When she returned to Harrow Bend, a paper bag waited outside her room above the pharmacy. Inside were tomatoes from Ruth's garden and a note asking Lena to return the basket whenever convenient. She carried half the tomatoes to Denise. By autumn, the New Dawn List had filled 19 pages. The trust did not publish totals or praise its busiest names. Each completed line received only a date. Each unfinished promise remained visible until someone took it up. The old Dawn List stayed in controlled storage except for scheduled research. Its value did not depend on constant display. The sounder remained unpolished. Bench 17 remained empty except for its documented artifacts. On a clear June morning, 1 year after the first inventory, Lena unlocked the depot before sunrise. The rails hummed. The old brass sounder stayed silent beneath its glass. "It is," Lena said. Behind her, dawn filled the depot that had once been given 7 days to disappear.